A closer look for you this half hour at a story the Target 12 investigators, no joke, have been tracking for years at this point. After multiple failed attempts, will Rhode Island's two biggest hospital groups finally merge?
As we first reported last week, the boards of Lifespan and Care New England have voted unanimously to proceed with this merger. But it's far from a done deal.
Yeah, 12 News politics and business editor Ted Nesi has been tracking this saga for more than a decade now. He joins us to break it all down. Ted, good to have you with us, of course.
Good to see you both.
All right, understandable if viewers are feeling a little deja vu here.
Absolutely. By my count, Brian, this is the fourth time Lifespan and Care New England have said they wanted to merge in the last quarter century or so. But I did know, I talked to both CEOs last week for a bit, and one thing that's different here is the context of the pandemic. They both say Lifespan and Care New England have never worked as closely together as they did during the height of the lockdown and when cases were surging in Rhode Island. They had no choice but to work together. And that meant that they were able to build some trust, I think. So I think that has put the starting of the discussion on a little bit of better footing. But at the same time, there are some very thorny issues, which have been why these have failed in the past. Who's going to run it? Where does the money end up, etc. So I think it's a little early to say this is definitely going to go through, but it'll think it'll be some months before we know that.
Ted, you and I have talked about this. In a normal year, this would be dominating the headlines.
Absolutely.
This is not a normal year, but this is still going to have an impact on a lot of people, not just hospital executives.
Yeah, and I know this topic can be tough for people to keep track of, so we put together some basic statistics that I think help to illustrate it. So Lifespan is the first list there. Rhode Island Hospital, Miriam, Newport, they also own Bradley, actually. And then Care New England owns Women and Infants, Kent, and Butler. Between them, they have over 23,000 employees in Rhode Island and over $3.5 billion in annual revenue. And those last two numbers are potentially one of the biggest obstacles here. I mean, you've already heard from people concerned that if you have most of the state's major hospitals in one organization, it would be so powerful and so dominant. Could they raise prices? Would there be competition issues? And I think that's something that the regulators in the state and at the federal level are going to look at.
All right, as we always say, money talks. All of this happening in the middle of a pandemic, very different financial situation for them.
Yeah, and this is interesting, Brian, because a few months ago I wouldn't have predicted this. So early in the spring, Lifespan CEO Tim Babineau told me he was very alarmed about Lifespan's finances. There were, remember, no elective surgeries going on. People were avoiding care. They were losing tens of millions of dollars in revenue. But when I talked to him last week, he was much more upbeat, and that's because the feds came through. Lifespan has now gotten $130 million from the CARES Act. Now, the thing is, over at Care New England, which again, that's Women and Infants, Kent, and Butler, they are not feeling as good because the federal relief money was tied to how many COVID patients you had, and the vast majority of COVID patients in Rhode Island went to Rhode Island Hospital or one of the other Lifespan hospitals. There's been much less for specialty hospitals like Women and Infants and Butler. CEO Jim Finale at Care New England told me it, quote, keeps him up at night, but he said he is hopeful because they have good people there that they'll be able to figure things out and get to a more stable financial place.
All right, Ted, we know you will be tracking every slight development in this, so thanks so much for joining us. And you can count on 12 News for complete continuing coverage of this potentially historic hospital merger in Rhode Island over the coming months.